Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. There is trouble in Asia. Not only the claim by North Korea of an H-bomb test, underground H-bomb test, not confirmed. There was an atomic test, however, and that is dire. That's the fourth atomic test associated with the rogue regime, the DPRK. But also, Chinese aggression is open right now, not only in the South China Sea, and we're about to speak of that, but also in the East China Sea against all of China's neighbors, especially against Japan. Japan has a treaty with the United States. Unlike any other treaty in that region, this requires the United States to participate in the defense of Japan as if it were California. Therefore, when Japan is threatened, the United States is threatened. Certainly the North Korean test threatened Japan, but most especially Japan is threatened by the PLA Navy. Gordon Chang, Forbes.com contributor, joins me, and we begin this year watching very carefully that the aggressors in Asia look in some way, Gordon, as if they've unsheathed their swords. They don't care that we see it. Is that a fair metaphor for what we're watching?
Absolutely, because we see China with a very new posture towards Japan, towards South Korea, towards the South China Sea, and towards India and the United States.
We welcome Harry Kazianis, who is a senior fellow at the Center for the National Interest, writing most recently about the Chinese aggression and what is to be done, and Japan has a plan. Harry, a very good evening to you. Japan is linked to the United States by a defense treaty, but it's also capable of defending itself. They have adjusted their constitution. Prime Minister Abe has been very clear that he is going to confront the Chinese aggressor. However, you are writing of a plan that is based upon the geography, the technology, and what the Chinese Navy must and has to dream it can do to break out into the Pacific. What does it look like? Good evening to you, Harry, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, John and Gordon. Well, the plan is actually a very smart and sophisticated plan that's been actually advocated by a former guest of yours, Toshi Yoshihara and James Holmes and a few others. It's been floated around for quite a few years, and it's really great to see that the Japanese military and government are taking it on. Essentially, what it calls for is that the Japanese government is very concerned about the rise of the Chinese Navy. Specifically, if the Chinese Navy could break out into the mid-Pacific, and obviously could do quite a few things to Japan and the Japanese Navy. So the goal is to basically use geography to bottleneck the Chinese Navy. Essentially use an anti-access strategy, which is something we've talked a lot about in the show, that the Chinese would essentially use. So the plan is very simple. What the Japanese would do is use basically 30-year-old anti-ship missiles. These things aren't very advanced. They're not very expensive. They're mobile. You might think of almost like Scud-type technology in terms of being like mobile missiles, things of that nature, and basically plant them on all different types of Japanese islands in the East China Sea, specifically the Ryukyu Islands chain, which is a very long islands chain, and that would basically bottle up the Chinese Navy. The Chinese Navy, in some sort of military contest, if God forbid it ever happened, they would have to pass through this island chain, and essentially what the Japanese could do is use very short-range missiles and use a lot of them. So if the Chinese dared travel through this island chain, they would be pummeled. It's a very smart, very simple strategy, and I think it's something that will definitely catch the Chinese attention.
Harry, for millennia, these islands have been undefended. There have been no missile batteries on them. There's been no artillery. And if we go back, for instance, 10 years, people are talking about Chinese diplomacy being deft, being beautiful. However, it seems that in the last several years, what China has done is provoke Japan so that Japan, for the first time ever, is now defending these islands. And it seems that this is going to be really counterproductive because now the Chinese will have to go through this iron wall to get to the Western Pacific, and they're going to suffer major losses just to be able to break out through the first island chain.
Gordon, I think you bring up an excellent point. I think this is the great failure of Chinese grand strategy. You know, if you go back to the early 1990s, even up to about 2006, 2007, Chinese diplomacy was all about the so-called peaceful rise, working internally to build their economy, build their infrastructure, really to make the Chinese economy world-class. But as China basically had determined that the United States was a declining power, in relative decline or whatnot, they had changed their strategy to now that they were going to pursue all these so-called historic claims, whether it's against the Senkaku Islands, whether it's bringing in its so-called renegade province of Taiwan, or making different claims in the South China Sea. In effect, they have essentially aligned the region against them. And now, the costs of this strategy are really starting to come home, and the costs are going to be quite substantial. Japan is basically reorienting its military, and they're not spending hundreds of billions of dollars like the United States. The key thing is they do not have to. They have a very strong technological base, and if they think smart and think asymmetrically, just like the Chinese have, using geography and using the weapon systems they already have, they can bottle up the Chinese Navy and take away all these advantages the Chinese have been building up with their Navy for years now. So China really has to think twice if this strategy is really going to be effective, especially with the economic difficulties they're starting to have now, especially with the Chinese yuan starting to have problems, with the markets that it seems like are down today. This is a strategy I think they really have to reach.
Seems like they're down today. I'm glad you give me that opening, Harry. The market's been halted, down 7% at the opening. Oil is popping up because of Saudi-Iranian tensions, and the yuan, the renminbi, is at a 4-year low. Bad enough news for you, Gordon?
Yeah, well, this is something which I'm even surprised about, because I thought that the Chinese government, after the debacle on Monday, would arrange things so that there would be calm in the markets for at least this week. And now with Shenzhen being closed, it just seems to me...
Let me take this, Gordon. This historically means that China's on the defensive. That's when there's trouble, when someone feels under pressure.
Yeah, and Harry raises a very important point, and that is that at the same time you see the region coalescing against the Chinese probably are not going to have the resources that they had been counting on, because their economy will not be able to support 3 or 4 aircraft carriers, trips to the moon, what have you. It's a real problem that China is now going to have to make some very tough choices about where it spends limited defense dollars.
Harry, what's the timeline for if they do construct this string of robots? How long will it take to put together? When will it be active?
Well, I think it would take probably a few years. I mean, they have the missile technology. It's a question of deploying it, making sure that they can put the batteries in different places where they'd be mobile to be able to move around. Because the key trick to this, gentlemen, is that with having batteries that are mobile, you want to make sure that they couldn't be easily spotted, so the Chinese wouldn't be able to take them out in some sort of situational struggle or something like that. And I think it's very doable. The plan also calls for some other things too, deploying F-35s, using aspects of the the Japanese Navy to sort of add different pieces in at will to make this an even more robust plan, and not just rely on the missiles. So what it essentially counts on is that Chinese would have to make a much bigger investment to take these missiles and other ancillary pieces out. I think they can do that. I think the United States could help in certain ways in terms of training, deployment, other different types of things. I'd say 2 to 3 years. I think that's very doable.
Gordon, Abe's aggressive. Does this now go into an escalation game? Abe counters with a string of mobile rockets to pen in the PLA Navy, and the PLA Navy responds with what? Threatening with nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I think Abe is essentially reactionary when it comes to the Chinese. It's because he's had some very important goals about trying to resuscitate the economy. I don't think that he wants a fight with China, but the Chinese have been pushing him, especially with their increasingly large and ambitious territorial claims against Japanese islands.
We thank Harry Kazianis, senior fellow at the Center for National Interest, writing about the Japanese response to the Chinese aggression. Again, I mentioned that the China market has been halted. We'll have a conversation about that throughout the evening, because this is a significant step down from the hopes of the beginning of 2016. Oil is up in Saudi Iranian tensions. That's obvious, and that's profound, and that's grave. We'll get to the nuclear weapon next, and the debate about what does North Korea expect for being a rogue state with nukes. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.